The United States in the late 1800s was a country of great progress and industry, intent on becoming the most prosperous nation in the world. The American populace was fixated on moving forward rather than living in the past. As a result, the initial idea to build a fair celebrating the 400th anniversary of Columbus, proposed in the early 1880s, garnered little support. But in 1889, France shocked the world by holding the most magnificent fair to date, the Exposition Universelle in Paris. America's showing at the fair was disorganized and shoddy, and paled in comparison to the imagination and scope of France's exhibition, which centered on the Eiffel Tower. The fiercely nationalistic American populace clamored for a response that would equal or even surpass France's World's Fair. After a tight race, Chicago beat out New York and Washington for the right to host the fair. With only 3 years to prepare, all the world's eyes were watching as some of the great Americans of the day raced to build the greatest fair of all time.
Chicago was the perfect site for the fair. It's perfectly situated, easy access from all parts of the country. Warm in the summer, but not uncomfortably hot. And best of all, it had Lake Michigan at its back, the largest, most beautiful lake many Americans had ever seen in their lives. It's a city of new wealth, growing at exponential rates, both upwards and outwards. By the 1890 census, Chicago was the second largest city in the country, with well over 1 million people, more than 10 times its size 30 years before. The streets were bustling with activity as trains, trolleys, coaches, horses, bicycles created an aura of business and excitement. At the same time, Chicago architects were building higher and faster than people had thought possible. The push to build these early skyscrapers were led primarily by these two young architects, Daniel Burnham and John Root. They solved the problem of Chicago's soil and discovered how to build towers stretching hundreds of feet into the sky. So when the fair came to Chicago, it was assumed that Burnham and Root would be the leading architects for the fair. And they were.
Burnham was a proud man, but he knew he couldn't do the fair alone. So as a result, he brought in all the great architects and artists from around the country, including the landscape architect Frederick Law Olmsted. Olmsted and Burnham decided Jackson Park would be the perfect site for the fair. It had a lot of open ground, it had the lake at its back, and it was in a great location. But the park was in a terrible condition. The grass was dead, the color was scattered, the trees were all dead, and it just looked terrible. The task ahead was deemed by many to be impossible. How could, in so little time, a park so desolate be transformed into a beautiful representation of American society? As soon as he could, though, Burnham began to build. Buildings were designated for every state, industry, foreign nation. You had the manufacturing building, the arts building, technology, electricity. All of these buildings surrounded a lake with a wooded island in the middle. Stretching westward from the fairgrounds for nearly a mile was the Midway, a street filled with exotic exhibits that showcased the different cultures of the world. The scale of the project was enormous, and many onlookers thought it was impossible to complete in so little time. And time wasn't the only problem. The exposition would need police, a fire department, a hospital, clean water supply, a transport of goods, and most of all, money. It didn't take long for Burnham to realize that stone and brick would be too costly to build the fair's many buildings. Instead, he turned to the plaster-like material called staff, which he painted white so that it would appear as stone. It was eventually decided that wood frames would be used inside the staff to build all of the fair's enormous buildings. The white staff led to the fair being called the White City, a name that would stick with it for the duration. One of the core purposes of the fair was to showcase the technological innovation of the times. And in this aspect, the fair was a tremendous success. The most prominent of the technological displays at the fair was the use of electricity. The exposition was powered by George Westinghouse's alternating current, which was safer and more reliable than the direct current that Edison had proposed and that had been used for years. Over 200,000 incandescent light bulbs lit the fair throughout the night in a magnificent display. The illumination, combined with the Columbian Guard, allowed visitors to walk safely at any hour of the night, which was something people were afraid to do in other cities. Massive spotlights visible from 60 miles away crisscrossed the grounds, and colored bulbs lit the water of the fountains in a magnificent display. For many visitors, this was their first time ever seeing electricity. But because the alternating current was so efficient, by the 1930s, 90% of urban households had electricity. People were also introduced to the telephone, the zipper, the electric iron, kitchen appliances, and laundry machines. There were even the first moving pictures on Edison's kinetoscope, the precursor to movies. The first Ferris wheel was erected on the Midway by George Ferris, and it brought riders 264 feet into the sky. A number of brand-name products we know today first made an appearance at the fair. These included Aunt Jemima's syrup, Juicy Fruit gum, Pabst Blue Ribbon beer, Cracker Jacks, shredded wheat, and Poland Springs water. This was all representative of America's shift during that time to a consumer culture, fixated with material goods and advertising.
The streets of Chicago were bustling with activity amid the commotion of the World's Fair, giving an illusion of a delirious and carefree atmosphere. Yet among this euphoria, there lurked a great evil, stalking the White City.
Tell me a little bit about yourself.
My name is Henry Howard Holmes. I'm 32 years old and I'm a Scorpio.
So can you tell me a little bit about this H.H. Holmes?
Well, he is what we now call a serial killer, and he has killed up to maybe 200 people, we have estimated. What did you do in Chicago before the hotel?
I owned a pharmacy with an older couple.
And supposedly you killed the older lady.
No.
Then what happened to her?
No.
What did you do before the fair?
Before the fair, he worked in a pharmacy with an older couple, and he helped them around the store to do work. So what did you do after working at the pharmacy?
I bought a hotel across the street from the pharmacy.
What did he do after the pharmacy?
After the pharmacy, he opened up a hotel across the street where he only used a few contractors to build the hotel, but he never used one and always switched, so only he knew the blueprints of the hotel. So you killed people in the hotel?
No.
What do you do with the bodies after killing them?
How did he kill the people?
In the hotel, he built a bank vault and had soundproof walls where he would leak gas and asphyxiate people, and then after he would kill them, he would put them down a chute that would go into the basement.
What did he do with the bodies that were in the basement?
He would, coming from a medical background, he would dissect them and sell the organs and the skeletons to medical universities to study. Visited the fair recently?
A couple times.
What did you do there?
Saw the attractions, tried some soda. Went on the Ferris wheel.
What was his connection to the fair?
Well, his connection to the fair was he set up the hotel right around the time of the fair. So many people, 27 million people, came to Chicago and they needed a place to stay. So many tourists came and stayed at his hotel. Hello, hi. Could I have a room for the night?
Yeah. Sir? Here's your room, sir.
Oh, it's a very nice room.
Hey, come back here. Why is the door locked? Come back. Help.
I can't breathe.
Holmes was, to put it simply, a brilliant and charming man. He came to Chicago with almost nothing, and he quickly became manager of a pharmacy, presumably murdering the elderly couple that had previously owned the establishment. He then decided to buy an underdeveloped city block across the street and constructed a 3-story building full of vaults, chutes, and gas pipes. In order to avoid anyone understanding the true nature of the structure, he hired and fired his construction crews every few days, citing poor workmanship and laziness. He filled the bottom floor with shops, which he filled with young women employees, his favorite targets. In order to finance this scheme, he borrowed from investors and eluded paying back these creditors until after the fair. He also took out life insurance policies with false names before he killed the women. After the fair, Holmes fled Chicago as the creditors began to demand their money. He moved from city to city with his accomplice, Benjamin Pitzel, and 3 of Pitzel's children. In desperate need of money, Holmes took out a $10,000 life insurance policy on Pitzel and killed him in Philadelphia. He later killed Pitzel's children too, and moved to Boston, where he was arrested by police for insurance fraud and held in Philadelphia. Meanwhile, Detective Frank Geyer traveled the country following Holmes's trail and looking for the 3 Pitzel children, who Holmes insisted had gone to England to stay with his former wife, Minnie, who Holmes had also killed. Geyer finally found the bodies of 2 of the children in Toronto, buried under a vacant house. The 3rd body was in Indianapolis. Holmes was convicted of murder and sentenced to death. After the sentencing, he confessed to the killings of 27 people, though the true death toll was probably much higher. He was hanged on May 7, 1896. The last month of the fair was an incredible success in terms of attendance. As the grounds were finished and word spread of the fair's magnificence, people from all over the country flocked to Chicago. One day alone, Chicago Day, brought in 750,000 visitors, shattering Paris's record of only 390,000. The fair ended up making a profit of over $1 million, solidifying its place as the most successful of all time. However, it ended in tragedy. 2 nights before the fair's closing, Patrick Prendergast assassinated the popular mayor of Chicago, Carter Harrison, in his home. Prendergast had felt slighted by the political machine system after he feverishly campaigned for Harrison's re-election, and Harrison did not reward him with a job. The last day of the fair was changed from a closing ceremony to a memorial for Harrison. After the fair closed, the buildings were left abandoned and gradually decayed.
The fair showed the world what a city could be, a beacon of light in the midst of a terrible depression. It set new standards for sanitation, architecture, electrical lighting, organization, and beauty in urban areas. Daniel Burnham would go on to help in the designing of new city plans for Washington, Cleveland, Chicago, Boston, Kansas City, and more. It also heavily influenced the American people. Frederick Jackson Turner delivered his frontier thesis, stating that it was the presence of a frontier that drove America forward. His words would be studied for years afterwards. Other great minds were inspired by the fair, including Henry Ford, Milton Hershey, Walt Disney, and many others. Most importantly, the fair demonstrated the growing consumer culture of America and its rapid technological and manufacturing advancement. The fair established the United States as one of the foremost industrial powers in the world.